Hi, I'm Autumn Durald Arkapaw, and I'm the cinematographer for Sinners, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast.
Hey, this is Cinepod, the Cinematography Podcast, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Hey, it's our holiday bonus episode. I'm your host, Ben Rock. Today on our show, I interview cinematographer Autumn Durald Arkapaw. Autumn is known for her epic cinematic camera work on Sinners, Oscar shortlisted, a supernatural horror action film. The movie, set in the 1930s, also integrates the spiritual power of Black American rhythm and blues music. It's awesome, and you should go see it. You should stop listening to me and go see it right now, and then listen to this interview, and then see it again. Autumn also shot the series Loki and worked with Sinners director Ryan Coogler on Black Panther, Wakanda Forever.
One thing with Ryan, it's like, you know, when you're standing next to someone that's a brave filmmaker, you feel like you can do anything, you know. He's open to anything. He's excited about doing things for the first time. He supports you. He creates an environment where people have power and the collaboration is at the highest level.
In this episode, you'll learn about how Autumn met and began working with director Ryan Coogler and their close collaboration on Sinners. How Autumn combined dual formats of Ultra Panavision 70 with the tall IMAX format in the same production, and the complex technical precision necessary for the music and dance sequences, including the piece set to the song I Lied to You, which is already considered to be one of the most ambitious scenes in modern cinema, and I agree. Happy holidays, and we'll be back in the new year with more full episodes of Ilya and me yakking our faces off. Thank you so much for making the time to come on the show again. When the movie came out, I think it was in April, kind of blew my mind. When I heard Ryan Coogler vampire movie, I was in, and then when I went to, because I'm a huge horror fan, but then when I went to see it, and it's just so much more than all that. So, I know that this isn't your first time working with Ryan Coogler, but could you talk a little bit about how the two of you, kind of met up and started working together, and kind of the nature of your collaboration with him? Because he seems like just kind of a one-of-a-kind director.
Yeah, no, he's definitely, I would say, one-of-a-kind human. For sure, now that we know each other so well.
That's good to hear. Honestly,
yeah.
He seems that way. You never know, when you don't actually know someone. But like, I saw a video where he was breaking down all of the various aspect ratios and release formats that you guys had to make on this, and he just seemed like the most excited about, like, just so filled with kind of the love of cinema that he was creating.
Yeah, no, he's a great person, and I think that's kind of a testament to his films, because you feel that in the films. They're very genuine and humanistic, and so you kind of, at the head of those films needs to be someone who's just a good person, honestly. But we met in person after we had our initial interview. So he initially became aware of me through a friend of ours, Bradford, who's a cinematographer who recommended.
We've had him on the show. He's great.
Yeah, he's like family to me. So I've known him for a very long time, and he recommended me to Ryan when Ryan was looking for a DP for Creed, because his usual collaborator, Rachel Morrison, who I'm also good friends with, was going to have a baby, and the schedule didn't work out. So it didn't work out for us on that film to meet or interview, but I didn't have enough studio credits at the time, I think, for them, the studio. But then when Panther came up, Panther 2, Rachel was also unavailable because she was directing a film. And Rachel texted me and was like, I think you should talk to Ryan. I think it'd be a great fit. So I had already done Loki, so we had a Zoom call, and it went really great. It was like we were like family. We're both from the Bay Area, so the call went awesome. And then afterwards, I talked to our production designer on Zoom, who's like family now, and Hannah Beekler, and it was a good fit. So that's how we initially met. And then I kind of, dove in quick to shoot Wakanda Forever. That project lasted about a year long, so it's a really long project. And we, kept in touch, obviously after the film, and I've kept in touch with all of those filmmakers. And so then when Sinners came up, he sent me the script.
Did having shot Loki, help to kind of grease the wheels in the Marvel world to get you to shoot a big Marvel movie like Wakanda Forever?
I mean, I honestly think what I love about working with Marvel, in my experience, is they're very supportive of the filmmakers that they choose to head up these projects. So When we were making Loki, and I think I probably talked about this last time, Kate was interested in me, and obviously all of those filmmakers that worked on it hadn't had that big budget experience telling that type of story, but they had a vision, and so they supported that. So I don't think it hurt, because I know Ryan said that, when he brought me up, they're like, we love Autumn, we just worked with her. So, but I would say just execution-wise, having that experience and doing that type of project, because Loki, although six episodes, we want it to feel like a film, so we shot it, with that breadth and scope. It helped a lot going into Panther 2, already having that kind of big budget experience.
Oh, that's great. So, in certain ways, it seems to me like Sinners couldn't possibly be further away from a giant Marvel superhero thing. And in certain ways, it's very similar in that there's, you're marshaling a pretty big crew, giant VFX. There's a lot of similar ingredients, but the end product is so different. Like when he reached out to you to shoot this, when you read the script, like what were your first impressions? What were your first thoughts about how to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough, I guess in my career now and then from the beginning, to work with people that are friends, that I would hang out with outside of work. So when these special people call me, I'm there for them in that sense of like, I know they have something important to say, something that's going to be close to their heart. And so, I knew he was writing something personal. He sent it to me, good scripts are few and far between these days, or just in general. And something original.
I can count the really good ones I've read in my life, on one hand.
Yeah. So I mean, when you're being sent something like that, you're blown away just by the sheer fact of what's on the page, but also just because it's Ryan, and previously what we had worked on is grounded in some other IP. So with this project, he sent it to me. I was actually in production on, or I was the night before I started Last Showgirl. Mm-hmm. So he sent it. I couldn't put it down. I read it immediately, and then I sent him an email, which I generally do when we're communicating and we're not living in the same city. So I put all my thoughts in a long email because I was just blown away. And the first thing I'm thinking is like, where did he come up with this? It's so cool and personal, and I had my own connection to the material, and so it was awesome. I mean, I remember that night, very clearly in my head, after I read it, because I was in a hotel in Las Vegas. So,
I mean, like when you read the script, did it kind of feel like the movie that y'all went on to make, or was it, was it? I don't. How much room for interpretation is there when you're reading a Ryan Coogler script?
Yeah, that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that, which is rare because I've done a lot of these. I think because it's so personal and it's grounded in some history that I'm attached to, like my family lineage and ancestry, that when you read it, you have your own kind of vision in your head of, I've been to the South. My father was born in New Orleans. I've seen pictures, I've seen films depicting, what, it was like, and so in the Jim Crow South. So it has a bunch of texture and humor in it, and there are all these big, bold new characters that you've never seen before. So I think for me, like I felt like I could see the world, like in reading it, like this beautiful kind of thing that he wrote on the page. But when watching the actors actually embody those people and like bring them to life, like I couldn't have imagined that, because I think they did such a fabulous job and became those people. And then we're in the space with the costumes and with the production design. It became more than I could ever have imagined. So, but I did have like a sense of what he was after I read it, because I know who he is, and I know what he likes, and I'm close with the designer, and so I had an idea, but it exceeded all those expectations, because I never thought we were going to be shooting in large format either. So.
Well, that brings me to probably the most obvious question about this, but shooting in IMAX, what led you to that decision, and like what are the challenges? You always you always hear about Christopher Nolan making these movies on IMAX. I actually personally know an actor who was in one of them, and she was telling me that she had to like redub all her lines. She had to ADR everything she ever said because the camera sounds like a lawnmower. And I know that some of the technology for that stuff has gotten better. But it just seems like it's. I assume that the skill set of lighting and lensing and all that stuff is basically the same. You're just doing it with a Volkswagen Super Beetle sized camera, and so accommodations have to be made. But what was that like? And firstly, just tell me like what led to the decision to make it in IMAX.
Yeah, the initial decision, I think, was he had envisioned it, which I'm sure lots of people know now, in 16 mil, and which he shot Fruitvale Station with. And so that was kind of his idea. And then we ended up looking at 35 mil in order to kind of eliminate some gate weave that comes with the camera when you're shooting 16, because we knew we had twinning. And when you put those images together, you obviously have one actor playing one role, and you shoot an A side and a B side. So we looked at 35, and then the studio called Ryan saying, had we explored a large format? And so he immediately called me and was like, let's explore this,
So the studio wanted it.
Well, I think it was just like early on in prep, it was like, have you guys thought about it? We weren't so far along, but it was, we were just kind of thinking of 35. We had moved into that, because we were looking at our technical stuff for twinning. And yeah, they brought it up. And so they brought it up early enough where we could still explore and pivot, And so he called me, and since we were shooting film, when you talk about large format and you're shooting film, that means 65 mil, whether that's 5 perf or 15 perf. So, we talked about it. I got a bunch of stuff together, spoke to my camera house, which I work with Panavision all the time. Spoke to IMAX. We got all of these things because Ryan wanted to go look at all of this stuff in a flat horizon. So we went out to the desert in Los Angeles. And we also went to Photochem and looked at some dailies, some 70 prints of films that were shot in 65. And that's kind of when, our attention, we kind of, started like looking at it seriously, because we fell in love with those prints that we saw at Photochem that day. So yeah, it was this really kind of quick, progression of like shooting this test and looking at the prints in 70 at Photochem in Burbank, and then also in IMAX headquarters, we looked at some 15 perf prints of what we shot out in the desert for our test. And it was beautiful, and we were immediately excited by it. And I think one thing with Ryan, it's like, when you're standing next to someone that's a brave filmmaker, you feel like you can do anything. He's open to anything. He's excited about doing things for the first time. He supports you. He creates an environment where people have power, and the collaboration is at the highest level. So whenever he's suggesting, something like, oh, let's do this for the first time, or what if we do this? It's like, it's never like discouraging. It's always like, your mind is open. It's like, I'm a parent, and it's like with a child, like you want them to explore and have authority and, just like be excited about something. So that's how our team works. So we kind of hit the ground running, and it then becomes this team thing where for our producers, Zinzi and Sev, they have to, help us make that happen, because it's a big deal, right? To just transition from a 35 picture into a 65 large format picture. So there's a lot of logistics that go into that. And our team's amazing. So, ultimately we were able to make that happen, and have the support of the studio. And yeah, I mean, it's not easy, I'll tell you that much.
So it's not easy in what ways? Just like on
it's
the day-to-day? I mean, I've heard about jamming and stuff.
No, not that, because that's just all like, when you shoot film, I came up shooting film. My first feature was on film. I was reintroduced to it, that same year, because I shot a picture on 16 mil right before. And I enjoy that pace. I enjoy that kind of, excitement and, being the only one exposing it and knowing what that's going to look like, and then sending it off to the lab and then processing it, and then maybe not seeing the actual dailies for, a day or a day and a half. That's something I enjoy more than shooting digital. So that stuff is all kind of, if accidents happen, there's technical stuff that occurs, you attack it, you have an amazing team behind you, you fix it. That's just logistics. But no, I feel like when you're dealing with, 100-pound cameras in the South, in the summer, mud and rain and weather, then it becomes a different story. It's like, we've seen those movies like Lawrence of Arabia everybody out there with big cameras trying to tell a story with scope. You're in the land, you then become a person that's a part of, the structure of the land, and you have to like kind of be able to work in it and, with the elements to get the most beautiful images. So that's what I mean. It's not easy. It's not a 30-pound camera that's digital that you just run around with and then have an image right away.
If you're like setting it up and you're like, oh, wow, this shot would look better if I was 10 feet over that way. It's an hour and a half of a move or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have patience and you have to have an amazing team. And Ryan is very patient. And it's important for us to get the right shot. It's important for us to get the right performance. It's important for us to create an environment where the actors can feel like they're in a real space, and so it's just about patience. And I like that film asks that of you. It asks you to be patient. It asks you to give it that respect, and especially a format like that, even more respect than loading a 16 camera. It's a different process, and your team members have to be of the highest caliber. So that's all I meant, is that like you the technical side you figure out in prep, and you make sure that everybody's on point. But it really is about patience and kind of trusting yourself, but also trusting the format, because jam can happen, but you have to, quickly pivot and, just get back out there and fix it. But my IMAX technician is amazing. His name was Schmitty, and he's with us every day. And so he's servicing the cameras in the beginning of the day and at night, making sure they work properly and all that stuff.
Is it true that they've developed IMAX cameras that are better for sound recording?
I haven't tested the new ones yet, but I think they are a bit better for sound. Yeah.
So does that mean that a lot of the dialogue has to be ADR'd later on?
If you shoot, because originally we had earmarked scenes that were heavy dialogue for Ultra Panavision 70, which is a sync sound camera, which is the 5 perf. But then throughout our shooting, Ryan decided to turn some of those sequences that had heavy dialogue into sound into IMAX, which means that you have to ADR after, kind of what you were mentioning before, because the camera does sound like a lawnmower. So it just takes everyone on the same page. The actors have to be okay with that, because obviously you can imagine working and trying to act and project your voice and keep your face. And
I mean it actually is like a larger accolade for their performance too, because they kind of had to do it twice. Like if they brought themselves to a really emotional place, they had to then go do it again in an ADR booth, months later.
Yeah. So some of those scenes, like the church scene that opens the picture, and Jack entering, Remek's kind of entrance into the film, those were supposed to be 5 perf previously, but then we turned them into IMAX later on.
Oh, that's interesting and incredible. So if you were talking to someone who'd never shot IMAX before, like what's the lens math and maybe even like the lighting tweak that like what are kind of the broad things that someone who's never shot an IMAX should know about it going in?
I mean, for me it wasn't like, film is film, right? It's the same thing when like if I pick up my iPhone and I want to take a picture, and then I pick up a medium format camera and I want to take a picture. It's what's in front of me that I'm excited by, right? Yeah. Technically I know the difference between the two. I know how to work my medium format camera. I know that I need my light meter or whatever. And then digital, I just pick it up. But it's about, the picture. So for me, it was really just, my team figuring out, like, obviously the mechanics of it, loading, the fact that it's a 2.5 minute mag, so that is its own different process.
Wow,
right?
It's like Super 8 film.
Yeah, it's really loud. The ergonomics of it, I think, for me was something to get used to, because the eyepiece is very close to the body of the camera. And I'm like kind of a goofy eye shooter where I operate with my left eye. So you can imagine.
Oh, so you operated a lot of the film? I mean, like it's always unusual, like the DPs. I don't know. It's kind of a split, but so many DPs are in Video Village these days.
No, I operated the whole movie, but for me, I came up in operating, and that's kind of how I know how to be a DP. I didn't operate on Wakanda Forever because, we're running 6 cameras. It's sometimes a lot of the very big picture action movie. Ryan hates when I'm in the DIT tent. I like being next to him. But I operated a camera, so that comes with its own stress and just shooting 2 different formats and exposing and doing lighting and all that stuff. So, but that's part of that's just how I learned how to do it. But So yeah, the eyepiece is close to the camera, so it's really hard because you're shoving your face here. So that was something I had to figure out, but that's just personal to me because of the way that I operate. I don't operate from the right eye. But no, exposure-wise, like my kind of the way that I expose film, it doesn't matter if it's 16 or 65 or 35. I go through the same process, As you know, obviously it's a bigger negative, so you have more latitude. So that, just takes testing to look at where you want your shadows to sit or your highlights. But I do the same thing, like how I expose people, being able to shoot a film in 16 right before that one. I didn't have a different dogma. Like I just approach it the same because exposure is very personal to the person. I don't look at exposure as a technical thing. It's an emotional thing. And it's trial and error, and it's figuring out how you like to expose. So if I'm going to give you advice and say, and give you all these kind of parameters and numbers, then you're paying more attention to the technical. And for me, film is such an emotional process, and exposure can be varied. It's like how it is, whether you're pushing or pulling it, or how it goes through the bath, or, how the light is and what lensing you have. So there's all these different variables. But I enjoy that, I enjoy that variation that comes with it. And I keep my, kind of underexposure very consistent as far as how much I like to underexpose, whether it's on 16 or 65. So yeah, I mean, it's just, you test it and you take a look at it. And for me, it was important to kind of make those two formats consistent, because the movie is jumping between two. So you want to make sure that the 5-perf, which is obviously 5 perforations of 65, and the 15 perf, which is 15 perforations, feels like the same world, even though you're jumping aspect ratio. So that's just kind of, looking at what lensing you have, how you expose it, how you light it, so that it has the same, structure. And I shot the same film stock for, the whole picture. So that's 500T, whether I was inside or outside. And to have that consistent grain structure.
In daylight and stuff?
Even daylight, yeah. So we timed it, because it's a tungsten stock, so you time it for daylight in your dailies and your DI. But yeah, you put a lot more filtration on the camera because it's not a slow speed; it's a 500. Whether or not you shoot, like if I'm going to go shoot like a 50D daylight, which is a tighter grain, right? You wouldn't have to put so much neutral density on the front of the lens. So that comes with its own pain in the ass because then you have a bunch of ND on the camera and you can't see through the eyepiece.
Oh man. Well, but like one of the things I just don't know is like what is a wide lens in IMAX? Is it what's a long lens? What are your workhorse lenses that you find work? And you keep talking about kind of the emotional part of it. Like how is there a different emotional vibe to a lens in IMAX than there is in regular 65?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a full set for IMAX. So as far as like the math equation of what in a Academy 35 versus the IMAX, I don't have that math for you.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure we can look that up. But it's like
yeah.
what are the IMAX lenses you found yourself drawn to? I guess.
Well, we only had 2. So to explain that, we had a 50 mil and an 80 mil. Those were made by Panavision for Christopher Nolan and Hoyte when they made Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. So it's Panavision glass made for IMAX. For that film gate. So they're beautiful lenses. So I also use those for this picture, and Ryan felt it was okay to tell our story with those 2 focals. So 50 millimeters, very, very wide. It's not fisheye, but it's very wide lens. So all of the IMAX wide shots in the picture. So, the opening of the film when Sammy is driving in the car and it's a big crane shot that takes you into the church, or when Jack enters the frame and jumps into the frame with his feet, that's a 50 millimeter IMAX. So we're doing all of our wide shots with those lenses.
You really feel that movement.
Yeah, you really feel the movement. You really feel the world. You obviously have, more height in the frame, as you know. And, the Oneer, the musical Oneer, that's also shot with a 50 millimeter IMAX lens made by Panavision. Dan Sasaki made those. And I also asked him to make an 80 millimeter Petzval lens, which has a really interesting, heavy field curvature, which gives you a lot of fall off, a particular bokeh and all of those things. So that's used at the end of the film when Annie's holding the baby in the kind of surreal, dreamy moment when Smoke is next to her and he just shot up Hogwood. We also used that lens profile fall off in the musical Wonder. So we applied that after the fact, to that scene. So that was our package for IMAX, and then the 276 is a proprietary Ultra Panavision 70 format. So it's an anamorphic lens that has a 1.3 squeeze ratio that goes on to 5 perf. So the lens squeezes the image on a 5 perf gate and then unsqueezes it in projection, which gives you that ultra wide 276 format. So completely different animal, obviously, like an insane amount of width, the widest format you have. And, so we're jumping between the two, something that's very tall and something that's super duper wide. So, yeah, you just have to have a ground glass. When I'm shooting IMAX, it shows me what the 276 will look like in your final image, so that when I'm framing for IMAX, I'm aware at the same time of, what's going to be cropped out for the, 90% of the moviegoers in the theaters. Because you have to be aware of that when you're framing IMAX. So you're always thinking about both formats when you're framing the picture.
So, and that leads me into another question, because when you're making this movie, it's going to be released in multiple aspect ratios, and some theaters aren't going to be able to play, IMAX or whatever. And as I mentioned, I think earlier, I saw a great video where Ryan Coogler listed all of the deliverables you guys had to create, and it's like you're delivering the same movie, but it's very different. And I read, I believe that you in part because of that, y'all chose to kind of center punch a lot of the images because it would export to all of these different formats well. But so how much are you thinking about that on a day-to-day basis while you're making the movie? Because it seems like you got, I guess, Ryan Coogler's job is to focus on the performances and everything. But as you're looking at it, are you like, oh, but there's something so freaking cool that's happening at the top of the frame that we're not going to see in the widescreen release or whatever? Yeah.
I center punch just because that's kind of something that I like to do in general. So Wakanda Forever, anything that I'm doing, I'm center punching because that's what feels right to me. It's just something, if I'm operating or even if I'm talking to my operators, they know that that's how I like to do things. I rarely short side. And yeah, it just feels like a stronger frame to me. And I shoot a lot of anamorphic, so I appreciate kind of a center weighted frame. And then there's context on your left and right of, you can have a 50 mil and, 35 anamorphic and, 35 millimeter anamorphic lens and shoot a nice close up, but then also back up and it can be a wide lens as well. So I like doing the wider lens closer for the anamorphic format. So yeah, I just center punch in general. It does work in this application because of what you just said, because whatever is important is always in the center of frame and it's always, in the crosshair. So when you go in to extract that 276 from the 15 perf, 90% of the time that head is in the right spot. But also it's up to the operator to do that. So I'm operating a camera, we run 2 cameras. So my B camera operator, Josh Medak, who I've worked with for years, who also worked with us on Panther, knows how I like to frame. And so he's also aware of that and making sure that we're, protected and that's how the framing is. Because I'm kind of control freak when it comes to just the consistency of where things fall in the image. But yeah, it's the most important thing is always for me in the center. Obviously if something's happening off to the side or I'm supposed to rack focus to that, then I'm panning to the right and putting that important thing in the center as well. And if it is to the right and you want that to be, it's not center punched, then you would just rack to it. And there's a context between the center and the right side of frame. But I had a ground glass that we made that, showed, because as not every IMAX theater shows 143, which is the full IMAX image. It shows a 190. So in my ground glass,
as some people call it.
Yeah, digital IMAX. So I have that, in my ground glass. So I'm very aware when I'm operating what is in 143, what's in 190, what's in 276. So it just takes a lot of brain power, to be honest. I was very tired at the end of the day because I used my brain a lot.
Seems thinky.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So there's, I mean, like you've talked about the musical Wonder, which, you know, pound for pound is, I think, one of the most cinematic moments I've had in a movie theater in years. It was just striking. But there's several kind of Wonders or not hosed down coverage-wise scenes. Like there's a scene early on where we're in town and we kind of cross the street and go into different stores and stuff like that. And it's kind of a big thematic moment in the movie because it's like where, you know, we're in the segregated South and we're you know, literally across the street, different people are able to shop and stuff. And you're bringing us across that. And the camera feels unbound. And again, you know, we're not talking about a light camera to work with or to plan that stuff out. So like what goes into, I don't want to get into like the hairy logistics of it, but maybe a little bit like what goes into planning, like we're going to make this scene where the camera just feels weightless and is moving, but obviously is an extremely heavy IMAX monster camera.
Yeah, Ryan is very good at, I think, envisioning something that he feels should be a oneer, but that it also is grounded in story, right? Mm-hmm. It has a place, because that's the thing. I think sometimes we'll see oneers or we'll see Steadicam shots that feel out of place, but when you can find the right, moment in the script to kind of execute a one shot, and the audience is with you, and you don't feel the hand of the operator or the filmmakers. It works really well, and he's very good at that. So it's always in our prep where he'll bring up, something that he wants to do. Like on our Tech Scout, that was shot in Donaldsonville in Louisiana. And our production designer did an amazing job of turning that street into a period street with, we obviously added period dirt, and she turned it into where there's a black side of the street and a white side of the street. So on our Tech Scout, I already knew that Ryan wanted that to be a Steadicam shot. There is dialogue in it, so we had to figure out how to shoot that in order to capture the dialogue as well, because, he says something, they're talking in the store, and then her daughter goes across the street, gets her mom, and then crosses back over. So in prep, it took a lot of thought of if we're shooting it in the 2.76 format, we're using the high-speed Panavision 65 studio camera because it's lighter weight than the 100-pound studio version of that. But high-speed meaning that it's a loud camera. So we can do it on Steadicam, but the dialogue, we won't be able to capture any dialogue. So that was something we talked about. So then my key grip and I talked about making a rig that was like putting the 100-pound camera on a remote head and putting it kind of on a little rickshaw rig so that we could capture sound. And we did a whole test. We taped out the stage, and he built this really cool rig that we had where it was, we could operate it remotely, the head, but it couldn't turn around in the shop. So then we're like, okay, so we have to bound ourselves to it being on the Steadicam, but if we're recording dialogue, it has to be ADR. So yeah, there were all these logistics. Lighting plays a big role in something like that. Because you have to expose for the interior and the exterior. There is an iris pull involved. The focus puller has a very hard job. Just the feeling of like when we were shooting it, we got very lucky that day. There was a lot of sun. So it was a beautiful day to shoot that sequence, going from one side of the street to the other. Our assistant director coordinating all the crosses. It just worked out really well. And it felt like that on the day. Like we knew which take was good. Ryan was very happy. But yeah, I mean, it's on the page, and then he brings up the idea of what he would like to show is that, the character is going from one side of the street, which is very important, that there is a white side and there's a black side. And so I think that's a beautiful storytelling note, but the execution of the shot was done so well that it feels really special when you watch it. People have mentioned it a lot. So it took a lot of effort, but I was very proud of our team because, when you're the filmmaker and what it takes to do something like that, it's a very small section of the film, but it's not easy to execute. So the fact that everyone came together and made it work. And Lily, the actress, does such a beautiful job. She has such a strong face, and she's such a badass. It adds that extra layer to the scene. But no, I'm glad you appreciate it because it's one of my favorite shots. Yeah.
It's one of those things where, the first time I saw it, I'm just like in the story watching the characters and I didn't really catch it. But in subsequent viewings, I'm like, oh my God, like it's a story beat, but it's also a culture beat. It's also, and I it's not my first rodeo watching a Ryan Coogler movie and knowing that he's going to be doing, 2-3 things at once and kind of trying to see what it is, because, this is a movie that's kind of presenting itself as a genre film, and in a way that kind of makes your guard go down about stuff like that. And then then realizing that, like, the shot, if it was a shot happening in, at the Sherman Oaks Galleria, and you're going from, P.F. Chang's to Baskin Robbins, no big deal, but you're actually saying something with the shot. And that's what's, and I'm sure that there's 100 of these in this movie, but, to me, that's what makes it so profound. And that leads me to the big one that you guys do during the I Lied to You sequence, which, like, honestly, like, makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It's so good in its design, in its execution, and also, like, in how it plays into the plot, because, like, that's the moment that Remick and all the vampires realize what's going on, and are drawn to them. It's like this, amazing supernatural beat. So it's like so much of that movie hinges on that, and it's pulled off, like, perfectly. I can't imagine it being done better. How much planning went into that? Like, what did that look like on the page? I'll hear about, like, in a Fast and Furious movie that, on the page it'll say, and then you see the greatest fucking car chase ever filmed, and you're like, like how much of that was in there? Cause it's so just packed with, it's the kind of sequence you can watch 10 times and catch new things each time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think because I've worked with this team so much, in the past, we, spend a year together, there's always something in his scripts like that. I remember when I read the Wakanda Forever script, it's like an orca jumps over the freeway. And I remember thinking, what the fuck? How are we going to do that? And we did it. And that scene's awesome. And it takes a lot of meetings. It takes a lot of logistics. It takes a lot of discussion. But he has those moments on the page where, I'll put a little asterisk. So when I read that, he reminded me in a Q&A we did the other day that he did put it in italics. It probably took up, 4/8 of a page or something, it's like a big paragraph. And it was so imaginative. So it reads beautifully on the page. And, there's some description, and it's a big chunk. And so it's a departure, right? So it's one of those things where you read it and you're like, this is beautiful, but, like, I need to talk to him some more to find out what, this actually looks like, because, the walls start to burn, and what does that mean for us? And, but yeah, it's something that's super imaginative. So when I read it, I was like, oh, this could be very beautiful. I wonder what that looks like. So it just takes a lot of our, heads of department getting together in meetings early on.
Did you guys previs or there's storyboards? Like, how did you even? It's just one of those, you see scenes in movies sometimes where I'm just like, I don't even know how you come up with that in the first place. It's so out of the box. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, it has, it is on the page. So it's something that, is in his brain, and it translated very well. So I would say that now that he sees it, he's probably very proud of it, because I think it really does capture the essence of what he was trying to say on the page. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of a testament to, like, having a good team and actually executing it well. And, it's not easy. But I think early on he had drawn some storyboards to kind of give a picture of, like, what that was, so these are just single images we're looking at. And then it evolves into meetings and figuring out what is involved with capture. What are we capturing in camera? What's the VFX takeover? What's the path of the camera? What device is the camera going on? We knew we wanted it to be shot on IMAX because it was a musical sequence. So, the camera could be loud. We put it on a Steadicam. We had to downspool the mag because it's a half load, which is a 75-second load, because it's too heavy to put a 1,000-foot load on it. So then you have to figure out where the stitches are, and we do a previs so that we can time it to the music and see how the path feels in the structure in the previs, and then you do rehearsals, and then on the day you work with everyone there, choreographer, and there's a lot of layers and elements to it, but it helps that I've done very complex things with this team of filmmakers before. So we love a challenge, and everyone is, I think, always wanting it to feel right and emotional. So that's all. It's always grounded in that. Does it feel right? Does it feel like you want? Are people going to connect to it? So I think that's always ultimately, like, what we're after, and how much can we capture in camera. So for instance, even the burning roof plate, we burned the roof on the last day of principal photography.
Oh, wow.
So VFX used that plate in creating that takeover that, transitions the interior to the exterior.
So how many shots are in that apparent oneer?
So there's 3 shots. There are 3 Steadicam shots in the interior space, which we shot over one day.
That was a day. Oh my God.
That was a day. Yeah.
That's a busy day.
Yeah, it's there's rehearsals prior, and again, like I mentioned, you have previs to kind of envision what it needs to do, and it evolves into there are a bunch of notes that go into that. So ultimately, on the day, you're in execution mode and camera movement mode, making sure the focus puller that's very difficult because I like to shoot wide open. My gaffer and I working together and making sure that the lighting is right because we want to be able to see the whole space, but it should be lit, just like the rest of the film. So there's all these different logistics that you work out, but that's 3 stitch points, and then it tips up into a VFX takeover, which we had the burning roof plate, and then it tips back down into a different night that we shot later in schedule at our on site, a different location, not on the stage. Mm-hmm. And that's on a 50-foot movie bird crane that pulls back on 100 feet of track. And so that's one night I think it was half the night because the next half of the night we had to shoot something else. So yeah, it's super complex, takes a lot of planning, but I think ultimately it's nice to see that audiences responded emotionally to it because you don't want to feel like, you're, the hand of the filmmaker with all these tricks and stuff. It should tell a story. So
like when you were watching that in dailies, was there a sense in the room of like, holy crap, we pulled that off?
I think it always makes me emotional still. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the one thing about this film that I'm very lucky to have worked on is when you work on something that you feel like you weren't there, you watch it in the theater and you're like, you were there, obviously, but you're actually watching it as a moviegoer and you feel like kind of out-of-body experience. And that scene, I think, always does that. I get very kind of teary-eyed when I watch that. Because I guess I'm proud of everybody. Because I'm like, wow, it's you feel it. So, and then the music, right, in the theater is very loud, and it kind of reverberates through your chair a little bit when that bass comes in. So yeah, it's nice, yeah.
Like how much, and just one more thing about that sequence, but like how much of that sequence was practical? Were there, I mean, I know that, the burning of the roof and stuff wouldn't have been safe, and you talked about the VFX takeover, but were there any of the additions of the characters in there, or was that all just choreography, just good choreography and good staging?
Yeah. No, it's all in camera. Obviously, if my light is in frame or something, but I try to
paint stuff out. Yeah,
exactly. I try to make sure that because I always hate that, and I feel bad for VFX. So I'll try to make sure my gear is not, because I light from above. But no, it's all in camera. And then obviously the stitch points are what's kind of done very elegantly, right, from a VFX standpoint. It's making sure that all those 3 shots that Ryan chose as the hero shots blend together very nicely. So yeah, so it's all there. Yeah.
Freaking brilliant. I mean,
obviously we erased the track because there's 100 feet of track.
Yeah. It's good that we live in a time where that's even possible. It just seems like de rigueur that gets done even in television and stuff all the time. Mm. So we're coming up a little bit here on time, and I just kind of had one other space I just wanted to make sure we talked about, which was VFX. And I've always been a giant fan of twinning shots, going back to Dead Ringers, shot, the Cronenberg movie shot by Peter Shushitsky. Mm-hmm. And obviously the technology has come a long way, but one of the things that blew my mind watching this is that you've got 2 Michael B. Jordans, and part of this is on his performance and his wardrobe, where it's like, I would look at Smoke or Stack and know exactly which one it was, but also how effortlessly he seemed to occupy the same frame so often in the film. And I know that a lot of that goes to VFX, but what were the constraints on you, and how did you kind of work fist in glove with VFX to make sure that it would be, honestly, I think one of the most seamless twinning movies ever made?
Yeah, I think early on, there's something to note is that the VFX supervisor and I are friends, and we've worked together before as well with Ryan. Mm-hmm. He was our VFX supervisor on Black Panther for second unit. So I know him really well. And And I think that says a lot because, when you develop those relationships with your VFX supervisor, you guys have to be on the same page because they're shepherding your image, even after you're gone. It's their job to really kind of make sure that the intent of the filmmakers, that they're protecting that, throughout the kind of pipeline and workflow, that like the lensing is consistent, the lighting's consistent, the texture of the image is consistent. If there's any extension, it feels of the space that was captured in camera. So there are all these things that I think are important to me that him and I learned to work with each other on the previous film. And he takes, he's very thoughtful about that, like thoughtful in mapping the lenses, thoughtful in making sure it looks exactly like the real photography. And that's very rare. So I commend him for that. But he's also just that type of filmmaker, that type of creative filmmaker. And it blends really nicely. So I think in the film, it's a testament to not only Michael's performance, because he's doing all the work, right? He's the one that's convincing you that there are actually two people, and that's the hardest job. And then it's our job not to fuck it up and put the two images together so that we don't distract from his beautiful performance. So it wasn't going to be me. I didn't want to be a part of messing that up. In a funny way, he does such a brilliant job that, we want to make sure because he is capturing both of those in camera. Everything's in camera. And then, whether it's a lock off or a split screen, or whether it's, captured on a techno dolly, which was a device that our VFX supervisor felt that would be kind of our workhorse device for being able to move the camera, for shots in the movie. And then there's also head replacement when needed, when they're fighting each other, when the shots are too complex to use a techno dolly. So you have to use, that's, what's being used for those shots. So in prep, we're just working with him, going over everything. But the through line is that everything that we're capturing in camera. And if it needs a reference, it's being captured, on 15 perf or 5 perf. The reference for Skies, the reference for Michael, the reference for anything is being captured on the material that, is the hero material and being given to VFX to use in order to recreate. And I think that's very important, and it's very tedious. And,
I imagine.
Yeah, so everyone has to be on board, but it's always, I think for Ryan, it's like, he's always writing stories that are grounded in something and grounded in like history and humanity. And so when when you have VFX, you don't want to take the audience out. You don't want them to feel like they're watching a fake version of something that's supposed to look like a photograph from the 1930s. So it's really nice to see people appreciate the work, because it is difficult, in order to like create this new workflow, which they did, because no one's ever done this much VFX for, an IMAX picture, like that. So, it was, obviously takes a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion, but
there's one thing I've learned, that there were many meetings had.
Yeah, there's just in filmmaking in general, because you have a lot of prep. But I think the most important thing is that we all wanted to feel and look real, and not feel like it was fake. But I did early on, and it's good to mention my good friend Jody Lee Lipes, who's a cinematographer.
Yeah, we've had him on.
Yeah, Jody, he's lovely, and we've been friends for a long time. And he did Dead Ringers with Rachel Weisz, and with Mark Ruffalo, picture with Derek Cinefonte. I know this much to be true.
That's what we talked to him about. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a pro when it comes to that stuff, and obviously has worked out all the kinks. So he was my first call. Obviously, when I knew I needed some advice on that, and he kind of ran me through what is important to look at and what to do there, like how to get us started, And one thing he said was do a practice kind of round of getting everybody together in the department, and doing a little fake shoot to see what everyone's role was, because the sound department is very involved in twinning, and then also just your assistant director and lighting and camera and everybody. So yeah, he was super helpful and thoughtful, and I called him a few times while we were shooting.
Even in that first scene where we meet Smoke and Stack, he lights a cigarette and hands it. I forget if it was Smoke handing it to Stack or vice versa, but it almost felt like that was you guys as filmmakers saying we got this, because it's a very simple thing if you just have two actors, and a very complex thing if you have the same actor twinned, to have him take something from himself and put it in his mouth. You know,
Yeah.
there's nowhere to hide it. You know, I think about like the Back to the Future 2 scene where old Biff hands young Biff the book, and it's like an animatronic hand that you can kind of tell you're just out there exposed in the direct sunlight, and there it is, just so good. So we just have a couple more minutes, and I always like to ask, like, what's the scene or the sequence or the thing you did that that people aren't asking you about, but that was like a major win, that was like a big deal, or a huge hill you had to climb to get this thing where it is?
I think I've been fortunate enough, I think, for these interviews, like when I have done them, people are very thoughtful and kind of recognize that what we did was pretty like groundbreaking, I suppose you can call it. Just for this type of picture, right? And Ryan writing this really original screenplay and shooting it on large format, shooting this, these faces on large format. So they've been pretty thoughtful about the questions that they've asked. So I can't think of something that someone hasn't asked about it. I mean, I always talk about the hardest thing for me was the weather, because I'm such a stickler for, just like I want everything to be organized, and I'm a very technical person. So that's one thing that I can't control is the weather. So, that on a picture beats you up, and you just have to be open to that. But you also, with that, get the most beautiful skies and kind of, exciting moments that you wouldn't have previously got had, the storms come in and left. But no, I think I was lucky. I mean, I work with the same people on my crew. I work with the same team, like I mentioned, and it was a fun picture. We had a great time making it. So I think everyone's been feeling that, we loved making it, and then, people are loving watching it. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Before we go, I would just encourage anyone to check out Sinners. I think it's streaming on HBO Max currently. Is there any place online where people can interact with you, Instagram, whatever, and ask you questions if they have further questions? Yeah,
no, I've been really kind of loving people reaching out. They have on Instagram, and I try to respond, and because it's just such a nice moment for our team, and I like to share and pay it forward. So yeah, probably Instagram's the best. @ADDP.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, and definitely come back if you can.
Shout out to your wife for being a fan, and hopefully I can meet her
I think
one day.
Between the two of us, we've probably seen it 8 to 10 times. So
amazing. Thank you.
This has been Cinepod, the cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory at hotrodcameras.com. Watch and subscribe to our show on YouTube, or listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow and interact with us on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. But not X. Don't do that. Thanks for tuning in.